In this video, we will be talking about drones. But wait, hang on, isn't this a photography channel? Why are you talking about drones? Well, you see, drones are immense fun. Why wouldn't you want to have a drone? They're basically flying cameras, and that is pretty awesome. That is why we're talking about drones. Okay, now we've got that cleared up, let's get into the meat and bones of this video. What is going on, guys? Shooting Dave here, so good to see your faces. Welcome back to the channel. Now, if you're new here and you don't know what I'm about, I am at Shooting Dave, a photographer from London that now lives here in LA, and I make photo and video editing tutorials, so if that sounds like something you're interested in, then please do consider subscribing. Now, as some of you may or may not know, I recently bought a DJI Mavic Mini with the Fly More combo. I wanted a small and lightweight drone that was an entry into the world of drones, and it wasn't going to cost the earth, so yeah, the DJI Mavic Mini was the one I wanted. I basically wanted something that had good enough video quality and with the ability to do aerial photography. However, we will get onto that in a second. But the main selling reason for this drone for me was the fact that it could easily fit inside my camera bag. Okay, so as you can see, the footage is decent enough. I mean, sure, the dynamic range could be better, but this is an entry-level drone. So as a photographer, should you buy it? Well, this is where you start to see some of the weak points of the drone. You see, the stills camera is only a 12 megapixel camera. That means about 4,000 pixels on the long end, which if you're printing a photo would be around A4. I mean, sure, it's good enough for social media, but if you're wanting to sell prints or even get some artwork for your own house printed, 4K isn't really the best. There is, however, another downside which will really be a nuisance to a lot of photographers. There is no ability to shoot RAW on this camera, so you can only shoot JPEG. And recently they actually added in manual controls. Before that, you had no manual control. That means no manual control over your white balance, your shutter speed, or your ISO. The aperture is, of course, fixed at f2.8. However, we will get into the firmware updates in just a second. But it's not all doom and gloom. You see, a DJI Mavic Mini is basically just a regular camera, and regular cameras, you can do regular camera tricks with it. So what do I mean by that? Well, you can actually shoot panoramics with it. It doesn't have the functionality built internally, and it won't do it automatically, but if you frame up on your subject and just shoot a bit up and a bit down and a bit left and a bit right, you can merge all of those photos inside Lightroom and get a much larger photo. The same can be said for dynamic range. If you don't feel like you have enough dynamic range in your camera, like you are photographing a sunset and you have a very bright sky with a very, very dark foreground, then what you can do is you just change your shutter speed whilst you're up in the air, take a photo, change it again. So basically overexposed, underexposed, correct exposed. Take all of those three different exposures, merge them together inside Lightroom, and then you have a HDR image, and you can play around with the exposure and contrast and shadows and highlights as much as you want. And that's another great way of getting more dynamic range out of your camera. What's this about shooting manually, I hear you ask? Well, in the latest firmware update from DJI, that you can now shoot manually in photo and video. That means you can set your shutter speed, your ISO, and more importantly, your white balance. you can do all of those manually. Okay, so why is that important? Well, as I mentioned earlier, you can't shoot RAW on this camera. It is only JPEG. So setting and making sure that your white balance is as accurate as possible is key here. And you also want to choose your exposure based on whether you want to retain the highlights or the shadows, or if you want to bracket. So having those options on this DJI Mavic Mini make it a much better buy now. So for photographers out there, you now have all the controls that you're used to, so you can enjoy flying around and getting those cool aerial photographs. And also using some of those techniques that I gave away about shooting HDRs or even panoramics, you can get much better image quality out of your DJI Mavic Mini. So things are looking up, pardon the pun. So what about the Mavic Air 2? Well, you see, now this has just come out and it's very competitively priced at $799. It is not that much more than the DJI Mavic Mini, and it is much, much less than the DJI Mavic 2 Pro. So it is a very tempting offering from DJI. It has much higher resolution. It has the ability to shoot 240 frames per second in HD. It has the ability to shoot 4K at 60 frames per second as well. So you can get those lovely smooth cinematic movements with it. And it also has a 48 megapixel camera, which is insane. I mean, that is such a good resolution. I mean, can you imagine if you were to stitch some of those photos? That would be massively impressive. However, the DJI Mavic Mini still has one very competitive edge over the Air 2. It only weighs 249 grams, which means it falls underneath the weight class for the FAA, meaning you do not need to register it in your country, and you do not need to get a pilot's license for your drone. I mean, I think that only applies to Canada right now, but I think it's coming across the US as well, and probably likely to be the rest of Europe eventually. So if you have anything over 250 grams, it will require you to register it, whereas the Mavic Mini is classed as a toy, which is perfect, because it fits inside your camera bag, it bypasses all the weight restrictions, and it still takes amazing images. And that is a huge bonus for people like me who just want an extra toy inside their camera bag. Okay, so my final thoughts on the drone. Well, I've only had it a couple of months now, and so far, I love using it. It is a lot of fun, and the firmware update has really changed the way I feel about this drone. Being able to shoot in full manual now really is a massive benefit, and it should not be overlooked. It should not be overstated how good this firmware update is. The ability to change your shutter speed, dial in your white balance, change your ISO, all manually is phenomenal. The only thing that is a little bit tricky is you cannot get the ability to shoot at 1/50th of a second when filming video. So we now have the additional 24 frames per second. That wasn't in there as standard, but it is now in there with the latest firmware update. But to be able to achieve the 1/50th of a second shutter speed is a bit tricky without ND filters, and you can't change the aperture to compensate for that. So I've ordered some ND filters. I'll link them down below. I haven't got them yet. I'm not affiliated or sponsored by them in any shape or form. So if you are interested and you need some filters for your Mavic Mini, then hit that link down below. But yeah, basically I'm itching to get out and fly this into some amazing landscapes. As soon as lockdown is over here, then I really want to get on in a car and go on a road trip and go and see some beautiful landscapes and send the drone up and hopefully get some pretty awesome photographs. But that is all for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you got any comments or questions, let me know down below. Maybe if you've got any tricks and tips that you know of that I don't know about for flying Mavic Minis, then let me know down below. I'm sure my viewers would like to see that as well. If you haven't already, please do subscribe, and if you aren't following me on Instagram, I am @ShootingDave, and I shall see you in the next one. See ya.